Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about You, Season 3, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We are picking up with the Gil situation. Turns out Gil's not dead, and I even love that Joe's like, honestly, this shows growth, love. You didn't kill him. You restrained yourself, so that's good. They're even using, like, the baby monitor to keep an eye on him. And I love that Joe's talking to Gil, and Gil's trying to, like, strike up the conversation and stuff like that. And Joe's like, honestly, you might have hurt the one person that might actually let us get away with this, love. And he's just kind of like spinning this situation like, right, but at the end of the day, like, yeah, because it's like, right, you did kind of get our son sick. He's like, yeah, and it kind of, understandably, Love would be, frustrated as she was because she was in the hospital with Henry. But, and then Gil's like, but I mean, come on, like injecting your baby with some like drugs and some stuff that we really don't know. So, I mean, it all worked out because your son's better for it because of his immunity now. And it's just like, Joe starts cracking his fingers. He's like, hey, yeah, I'm sorry. And it's like, all right, let's let bygones be bygones. And it's like, we'll kind of forget this whole thing happened. And Gil's like, yeah. And his hand is shaking. Joe's like, yeah, the moment we let him go, he's going to run to the police. So now they start concocting a plan of like, what we need to do is we need to get some dirt on Gil. The moment we get some dirt on him, it'll be a, mutual self-destruction. If he tells on us, we'll tell on him. But also at the same time, they've still got to deal with the fact is that there's this whole Sherry orchestrating like, oh, let's look for Natalie situation. So like that's all going on at the same time. Obviously, Matthew and Theo are arguing about it because Theo doesn't want to get involved in it because he sees all this for what it is. It's just, people on Instagram getting likes and blah, 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 blah. Like, no one really cares. And for him, it's like, people are just saying all this stuff behind it. Like, they're like, because despite everything, he does care for Matthew. Like, he's like, yeah, like, might be my stepdad. We might have our contentious relationship. But, which I use that word a lot lately, contentious. I don't know, contentious. I like it a lot. I don't know. But, he doesn't like people trying to paint him out to be something he's not. It's like, yeah, he might be a little cold here and there, but he's not some murderer. So Love offers to go with Theo to the, the search party looking for evidence. Because that way, no one has to worry about, that way, like, you got me, you have a friend by your side. That way, because, Matthew wants to go and wants Theo to go too, but it's just like, it's just going to add more fuel to the fire. But it is a thing, like, if they don't go, it is going to look even more suspicious that they happen to not go. So at the same time, I love that at one point in time, like, Joe is looking up all this dirt about Gil, but it turns out he's like kind of impeccable background. It's nothing he could really find out except about what's his geologist like jokes and stuff like that. It's like the only thing he can find wrong with Gil. And so he talks to Gil about something. It's like, right, tell me. He's like, all right, there was this money situation, Vegas. And Joe's like, yes. Tell me more. Oh, a lady, Vegas? Yes. Why didn't I start here from the beginning? Yeah, and we used to $600, and what was it like? You bought a room, a whole bunch of blow, and dominatrix dressed as a nun, and it's like, and we lost it. And then the next, like Monday, we paid it back, and he was like, wait, what? He's like, don't you see what we did wrong? We lied. I love that, like, he was feeling so guilty about it. But it's like, it doesn't matter if you lied. You paid it back, so it's not like, and it's not like you're like Bernie Madoff or something like that with like how much money. It's like it was $600 and you paid it back anyway. So it's like, it's not like it was a Ponzi scheme or something like you took like millions. If that was it, we'd have a whole other conversation. You bought a hooker with the money. No, but you didn't. You just like, you bet on it, you lost, but you also ended up replacing it. So it's no harm foul, like no one knew. And just like, I need something more than that, Gil. And Gil's like, fuck. Because he thought he gave Joe enough. He's like, what do you want me? Because he had to think long and hard about, like, it's like, right. Because the moment he found out what Joe was like, oh, right. Give you some dirt. All right. Let me think long and hard about it. And he came up with that, but it's like, nope, that's not going to fly. It's interesting, too, because, like, Joe's balancing that, plus the search party, plus everything with Mary and his boss, which they're actually on better terms now, because she kind of calls him out because it's like, oh, about the book he took, it's like, right, because he's trying to, sell it for Ellie and stuff like that. But he, like, calls out the fact it's like, no, like, you have these assumptions about me being from a great background. I'm not. Like, I grew up, like, there were no shelves for the book type of situation. And it kind of makes her realize, like, how important books were to him, because he was taken in by someone who loves books. And it made him kind of, find some spark in kind of a very sad, miserable life. And at that point, him and Marion kind of hit it off because she's like, right, I'm gonna apologize. So they're on good terms now. So it's like, oh, that's good. So that's one less hassle, but still got to figure out what we're going to do about this whole Gil situation. Obviously, Love is suggesting that Henry go with his grandma for a little bit while they're figuring this whole thing out. And I love that while this is all happening, like, Love decides to look into... decides to, talk to her mom about getting, like, Cy, their, like, fixer who looks into stuff for them. And she's like, she brings it up to Joe, because Joe immediately was like, right, if we can't get any dirt on Gil, maybe we'd have to kill him. But then Joe snaps at her. It's like, you're not going to make me kill him, because he doesn't want to, because for him, it's like, I got to be a good father, and he slip up and I'll screw up Henry. And it's like, we can't do that to Henry. And Love talks about it later on, like, understanding, like, how scared he is, because he's like, yeah, he has this, like, effed up childhood as well. And so for him, it's like, having that complicated, like a parent kind of not doing and being on their best can screw you up. He's like, look at me, I'm fucked up. It's like, but it's like, you don't have to worry about that, because like Joe was trying to overcompensate for the bad that he's done, but he's thinking like, right, as long as I go this moment forward being a good guy, then I don't have to worry about it. I mean, even him and Gil had a conversation about like, all you can do is protect your child, be good, and kind of send them on their way. And even then being like, no matter how this all plays out, he's like, please let me see my family one more time. It's kind of what he was saying earlier. But Love using Cy, because Event brought this up to Joe's attention of like, right, trying to do whatever they can. You might not like it, but it's like trying to do everything to protect the family. Cy looks into it and finds out some dirt. And I love that Joe's like, oh, she's good at this. She's really good at this. Like the moment she puts it all on blast, it's like, oh, how you were able to get your son Alan into Dartmouth? It's all these payoffs and stuff like that. But then the more time he looks at it, he's like, why would it? And then Joe's like, wait, you didn't know anything about this. And they both look, and it's like, he's like, no, like, why would Margaret do this? Oh, I was like, oh, Margaret did it behind your back. But why would she? And it's like, because Alan did it again. And you're like, what? And Joe had looked into it earlier about, like, an attack of a young woman on a campus. And he was wondering if it was related to Alan. Turns out it's not, like, the photo description. But then he thinks back on it. He realizes the reason why you had to leave Ohio was because of Alan. He sexually assaulted a woman. And now it seems like he's done it again, and Margaret's paying it off. And it's like, despite all he said, it's like, even at his best, you try to be a good parent, you try to raise your kid right, you kind of, and kind of leave them to their own devices. And that kind of starts making Joe wonder. It's like, right, even doing the right thing, there's a good chance I still might screw Henry up. But obviously this news broke Gil to the point he killed himself. And it's like, obviously, it's like in this moment, everything's falling apart. It's like, Love is like, we got to come up with a plan. And it's just like, Joe, Quinn, Goldberg. Like, I'm going to go, because the search party's going. Like, I'm going to go do that. We'll figure something out. And then before she's about to leave, she's like, Joe, I've got a plan. So the plan is, and then it's like, I love that Joe immediately later on was like, right, the moment you start laying it out, I started realizing like, oh, your brilliant plan. It's like, yeah, because I even love he says it like later on, we are by no means criminal masterminds. Once again, they kind of fumble. I mean, Joe in particular kind of fumbles and stumbles. Yes, he can be methodical, he can be meticulous, but he can stumble and fumble his way through some of these situations over the course of the series. And they're kind of bumbling their way through it like, oh, look what kind of shenanigans they're in again. She almost killed a guy, but knocked him out, and they were trying to blackmail him into not exposing him for what they were up to, but sadly that guy killed himself. And now they have to frame him for the murder that Love committed in the first place. Wah, wah, wah. It's that, and I like that the show kind of plays into that. Like, I mean, but maybe that's also like my warped perspective on kind of creating like taking that narrative and putting it like almost in a like comedic device like that, like our perspective of like, almost like that WandaVision-esque, or even, since it could fit with WandaVision, but obviously be like Kevin can F himself, kind of along those lines. I like it can kind of like make a parallel in that regard of just like how that show like structures like some serious stuff and just kind of puts like, tries to put like a comedic twist to it, but like a dark comedic twist to it. So it's kind of almost to that nature, but that's just me applying that. You just from an outside perspective could like see the show painting it from that narrative of like, oh, here we go again, insert laugh track. But Love went out there with Theo and started planting the flags and stuff like that, and ended up like hiding the act. So also I love Sherry being like, I love that she's doing her thing, like, oh, the beautiful family being out here to help us, and then she stops partway. Hashtag Natalie come home. She has the nerve to turn around to the hashtag on her back. I was like, and then like as she was getting off, people were clapping, and yet some people, in particular Theo, must be like, what the fuck are you clapping? What is wrong with you people not seeing through this BS? So, which he gives it to her later on, because obviously it's like this whole thing of like, oh yeah, like Sherry was hanging out with her crew and she was cracking jokes about Matthew, and Theo heard it and he went off on her about like, oh, you want to Instagram it? Yeah, for the likes. And Love has to pretend like she's on Sherry's side, like, oh, are you okay? He's just having a bad day, which pisses Theo off more, because it's like, right, I thought you were different. You're kind of one of them. If you're defending her saying what she's saying, obviously Love is like, well, I'm going to have to make sure I don't piss off Sherry, because pretending to be a friend, like I'm part of the clique, keeps her off my back and just keeps us copacetic. So it's like, we're finally at a good place. I want to keep it that way, because the more I'm in a good place with her, the less likely she's to sniff in my business. At the same time, Joe is like, no, I got to do this for the sake of protecting Love and our child. So he ends up setting it up and make it seem like, you know, Gil wrote the confession letter. I wonder, I mean, I guess it's just Joe. Maybe he did look through Gil's social media, so I guess he got a feel of like how Gil would write. Because for him, because I was like, because that's such a specific thing. You have to write a letter in a very specific way. Or maybe it's just like because Joe is very good at picking up on human nature, so like maybe he caught conversations between Margaret and Gil at the party, so he had a good enough vibe. But like, I feel like it had to be the social media, because like even signing it Gilly and not just Gil, like that speaks volumes. Because the moment Margaret came in, what did she say? Oh, Gilly? It's like, in those type of things, you know, you watch enough, not true crime, but like crime drama stuff, you pick up on that, like, right, like the way, like, that's what will fall apart with text messages. It's like, right, this person texted something weird. It's like, you know, you have to mimic someone's style of like how they act. It's like, oh, do they use emojis? Do they not use emojis? That's like, this stuff comes up, you know, that matters. Which is always that weird thing with crime dramas too, because it's like, even me saying all that, it's like kind of a play-by-play book on like how to commit murder, which is, I'm not co-signing that in any shape or form, but you always feel like that to some extent. It's like, there are people who will take a lot of stuff from TV shows. I mean, there's people who've kind of like taken Breaking Bad and tried to do blue meth in real life, like by making it. I mean, there have been stories of like, oh, Walter White in real life. Now, whether that's just like happenstance or whether it's just someone being like, hey, I'm in the meth dealing business, so oh my God, Breaking Bad's a play-by-play book. Because I think they give you enough that you could do that. And once again, not in any shape or form, and I want to twist it and contorting it, I'm not co-signing making meth. I'm just saying, like, I think that was a concern, like, yeah, they do enough of the, like, give you enough of what's going on to be like, some people could take this as a play-by-play book and just decide to do it on their own. It's just that conversation. I think it's an interesting conversation that could be had about media in general, but not trying to demonize anyone or anything, but I could see, like, someone taking that and being like, oh, like, someone looking at it from that view lens, like, so... But, regardless, Love and Theo kind of go off as, you know, they're hanging out together. And so go back to the bakery, and obviously going through what he's going through right now about, like, right, Natalie's disappearance and what that puts his family in the middle of. And he talks to Love about, like, obviously he's like, I read about 40, and he's like, yeah, she's like, they will always focus on this and that, but they will never focus on, like, how much of a big, caring heart my brother had, this and that. Like, it's just the minutia of, like, right, like, how much my brother was, like, the only person who really knew me, and it's like, they'll, like, never let you forget what you've been through, because it'll always be publicized, especially if, like, you're caught in, like, that news storm of just, like, yeah, it being such a big focus, especially in this town. It's Natalie, so, but she understands that from her perspective. And obviously it's the whole conversation about because it's like, Theo's like, oh, like, personal family tragedy, does it make me more fuckable? Which Love is like, oh, yes, it does, but that's not the type of person you want. You want to find someone who understands you, who gets you. And it's like, how you find that person. The moment he's leaning in like that, I'm like, this is about to get complicated. And she's like, you'll know. And then he kisses her and she's like, yeah, don't do that. It's like, yeah, I made it clear that there was not going to be any lines crossed between you and me. But at that same time, like, cops ended up finding the axe, because obviously Matthew was talking to one of the detectives about like he's like, yeah, what was the point of this? Like, we searched and everything and kind of came up with nothing, and just despite all like the social media influencers kind of taking advantage of, that's all this really turned out to be. Because it's like the detective tried to be like, yeah, it's a good thing we didn't find anything, because if we did find anything, and Matthew kind of finishes it like, it most likely mean that like Natalie isn't alive anymore. So she's like, I want you to kind of keep at it, but then they find the axe, and that kind of solidifies it. So, and because of Gil's suicide note, and it's like, oh yeah, like, we're not criminal masterminds, but with everything laid out, things can go a certain way. It's like most people just take it as is, and it's like, yeah, we're done. Yep. Boring suburban people are just gonna be like, yeah, that's it. Why would anyone look more into it? I think Matthew is. Because the problem is, they wrote it in a letter that Natalie's body, because they can't take the chance that they find Natalie's body and examine it, because I'm sure that's not going to, maybe there's some inconsistencies in the story. One damn inconsistency is like they made it seem like he took her body to the water, but it's obviously out there buried, and it's like the moment her body comes up, it's going to be like, why did the letter say he threw it in the ocean and her body's actually here? Was that just to throw us off? But like, no, he confessed to it and everything, so why? That's going to throw out some red flags and inconsistencies, and maybe Matthew's going to look into that. So I think that's going to come back to bite them. I mean, but I think the reason why they didn't actually say like, oh, the body's buried out here, because there's potentially still evidence on the body that could come back to them, and maybe like the time of death. Because if they found her body, you could put it to, well, I guess the argument could be like, well, he killed her, and then finally the guilt got to him, and he killed himself. So, because I was about to say the time of death time frame would probably like be an issue, but I'm like, no, like making it seem like he just, because the reason he hasn't showed up, and making this point to send his wife, the kids, to be away with his wife, even saying the letter like, oh, like maybe you can make it so that Alan can be a better man. Like obviously like dealing with his own monsters is kind of how they wanted to face it. I mean, granted, there's still some truth to it, just because that's why, Gil ended up killing himself in the first place, is related to like, right, feeling like he failed as a parent with the whole Alan thing. So it's twisted, but they're like, that played in line with what kind of happened, but obviously like Joe and Love take advantage of that. So that's interesting. But I just, it's not going to be that easy. It's going to come back to bite them. They're not going to get away with that so easily. So, but for now, it seems like, oh, everything's copacetic, and until it isn't, until maybe Love slips up again, or Joe in this particular case, because he's talking to Marion, and she's like, oh, here's a book you can and it's like, he's like, oh, she's being nice to me. Oh, like, is she joking with me? And she's teasing me. He's like, is she flirting with me? Like, no, but he's like, oh, like that thing with her necklace, could it be this? Like, oh boy, this is how we got into the Natalie situation in the first place. And if Love finds out that you're obsessing over someone else, we might have a repeat. And I think it's interesting, because he might find himself in that situation. He's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hide it better, because she found out about the Natalie situation. That's why we're in the situation we are in. But despite everything, it's like Joe can't control his compulsions. Because it's interesting, because I think we're going to get to the heart of it, like why he is the way he is, trying to like obsesses over women. Because I think this stems from Fiona, because that woman is like, oh, you're a good kid, and if I were to adopt any kid, it'd be so like that need for like validation and love. Like obviously, like he talked about it, like his circumstances of like not wanting people to leave, and we don't know what that Fiona situation was now, whether it's like she turned out not, because he almost like treats people like they're perfect, whether it's Candace, whether it's Beck, whether it's Love. He has this perfect vision of them, and maybe that's what just like Love presented herself a certain way, and he fell in love with that woman, and there's still parts of her there, despite kind of the other bits. So maybe the same thing applied with Fiona, like he saw her in this particular way, which I totally get it. Like, yeah, it reminds me of being madly in love with my second grade teacher, Mrs. Smith. I was smitten, dude. Because she was the kindest, sweetest person, and like in my personal opinion, one of the most beautiful women I've ever known in my personal life. So she will always have a special place in my heart. But I remember crushing on her so hard when I was a kid. But even looking back, I'm like, she was like ridiculously beautiful, but also like just the sweetest, kindest person, too. So like you'll find yourself, like, especially in Joe when he was in a vulnerable state like that, her saying all those sweet things. Like, I think that might be the psychology. She might be the straw that broke the camel's back, which eventually led to Joe having like the little like, oh, the obsession that he has about certain women. Like, I think since we're focusing on so much of that this season, I think that's going to be a key crux of how that story played out is going to be very informative of just about the rest of Joe's story. So we'll ultimately have to wait and see where things kind of take us from there. But the fact is that that's sparking again is definitely going to be interesting. Theo does seem like he's leaving in the aftermath of all of this. But it turns out, like, I was like, the flowers from Theo? It's like, no, they're from Sherry. From like, oh, thanks, friend. So, Love is kind of like, I think, kind of sad to see Theo go. Because, like I said, I don't think she looks at Theo in a romantic sense. But it's like, maybe on some level, she looks at him like 40. It's like, no, I don't like you in that way. But you are someone who can understand me and sees me for who I am. To some extent, you know? Someone who gets me, and I kind of get you to some extent, so that's why he kind of latched on to Love the way he did, and I think she kind of did as well. But I think maybe you could almost draw some parallel of like what he's trying to do with like Marianne, like Joe is, and then like Love and Theo's thing. Like, granted he's leaving, but maybe there's kind of a thing of him coming back, or maybe Love finds out about the whole Marianne thing, and then she latches on to like Theo, but then like Joe finds out about it, and then it turns into a, oh man, look at what we did again, womp womp. Once again, just kind of throwing it out there. So we'll have to wait and see where everything ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.